A few weeks ago, there was a negative review in The Nation of Adrienne Rich of this book, Later Poems, which begins in 1971 and goes to the very end of her life. That's what I've been doing the past two or three weeks, is reading this book from the cover, from the beginning. It's an extraordinary experience. The Nation, believe it or not, has a long time history of trashing leftist poets. Why? I don't know. But so what I've written is basically, it's based is pretty much on that, and I'll only read some of it. And it goes back to that same thing I was talking about Leslie, the whole issue of talking about writing about the self. Like many poets of my generation, male and female, I became a poet with the reading of Diving into the Wreck, 1973. I'm still in that big, overstuffed, faded blue chair we hauled up from the snow ditch beyond the health food store in Plainfield, Vermont, reading that amazing book. The thing I came for, the wreck, and not the story of the wreck. The thing itself, and not the myth. For the first time in my highly literate life, I am reading about my own situation. I read in those poems what was overwhelmingly true of my private personal life, of an all-consuming hurt and injustice, near madness and mystery, of a system I was raising my children into. By 1973, I was 14 years into two men who could not talk to me. The first, complete silence, literally no words. And the second, in some ways more frustrating, hurting, because he was a political radical and a visionary artist who talked and jabbered and shared with me all the time, though never in exchange with me. I think he assumed that in sex there was exchange. Adrienne's poem, the first one in the new book, she, by the way, also, she died March 27th last year. She did the selection of it. She pulled out the poems that she believed were the important ones. She also always said, though she had won many prizes by 1973, that she was embarrassed by the early poems. Adrienne's poem, the first one in the new later poems selected anew, is from Diving into the Wreck, trying to talk to a man about driving into the desert where we are testing bombs, surrounded by a silence. It sounds like the silence of the place, except it came with us and is familiar, and everything we were saying until now was an effort to blot it out. Out here, I feel more helpless with you than without you, talking of the danger as if it were not ourselves, as if we were testing anything else. Diving into the Wreck was the first I knew that other women were in similar loveless relationships, relationships of power, not love, I can say now. It was the first time I understood that I wasn't loved precisely because I was a woman. It was the first time that I realized I could speak in another way, to another love, i.e. to the world, and maybe even be heard. I could be of use, as one poet put it. The argument against the use of the I in poetry, against narrative, against the personal, the autobiographical, against the political, against the voice of truth and earnestness, that argument continues, is as old as the hills. It's what Aristotle is talking about in his Poetics. It's about class and power, and what we mean when we use the adjective Aristotelian. But Diving into the Wreck was a poetry that changed the world, precisely because it was a writing from the personal. Here's how one poet put it. Problems you had thought were private and personal, especially problems with sex, marriage, body image, work, parenting, domesticity, were not unique, but rather widely shared, the result of systems of inequality rather than failures of women. Consciousness raising was crucial in forming feminist thought on a whole realm of issues, from economics to government to education, but it was particularly useful in giving a name to the nameless forms of oppression felt in realms previously relegated to the non-political arena of personal relations. White male modernists like Auden had despaired of making things happen with poems. Adrienne Rich's poems made things happen. They were a big part of a big change. Early too, I read in the American Poetry Review essay by her or on her, in which she said, and I've quoted it ever since to my students, "In the beginning I wrote to show how much I know. Now I write to find out what I know." Something like that. For me, it was the first articulation of a psychic process, an aesthetic I was finding partly through her. I was grateful. I had so hated Aristotle's aesthetics that my new critics, professors, the poetic artifices, the Aristotelian formalism, the asphalt gloves of form, as she put it. I knew deeply that those artifices were of the same artifices that oppressed the world, the exclusiveness, the conclusiveness, the preciousness, class, and what I couldn't think then, the worldwide patriarchal systems. I did become a political radical in college reading Aristotle in rebellion, but I did not comprehend feminism and its universal importance. She's the voice. I want to try to describe what Adrienne Rich does that's so exceptional, so core with her poetics. To find a way to say this in a way that it doesn't offend. It's not just her subject matter, it's process from her psyche. This is a female dialectic. All her poems, just about all of them, up to the very last in 2012, are from an aesthetic of deep exchange. Herself, her body, her sexuality, her pain and illness, her story fusing. Suffusing is an important word for her. With the air she breathes, the roads she drives, the rooms she's in, with the lover, with the friends, with the world, with the news, the events, our policies, our politics, the years were being fused with the land's being, the planet's being, the stars, with history, with the past, with time's power, 1985, 1988, one of her books. There she is, all the way, giving herself in exchange. This is not your typical ego showing the world how much he knows, how good he is, how capable. Okay, I'm going to skip some of this. Most deeply, I think she's a philosopher, deeply meditative, and that's sitting, probing, trying to see the veils that bind us into this tragedy, not just by the political, but by the very nature of life and death. Her main focus, somehow, do I dare say this, is not language, it is being, the nature of all the world. She's always trying to penetrate the veils, not the tricks and trippiness, the play of language. Her focus is not finally language, as in Leslie Scalapino, the language poets, who are also philosophers. Maybe most great poets, though she uses language to make her investigation. Remember the original etymology of poet? Maker. She ponders to use the oldest expression, the meaning of life. Her poems are meditation. They are open. They are not conclusive. They are from note-taking, journal-keeping. Though she writes few such poems, they are from the mother of 3 boys, from the wife of a man who killed himself. Origins and History of Consciousness is the name of a poem. A typical name, I might add. Meditative, then sleepwalking, next to death, radical, moving. The Dream of a Common Language is another, the name of the book, and also the name of the book. She became the voice of our generation. I mean, you go back and you read this, as I have done the past few weeks, and it just is stunning. All these ideas, and she puts the year on every single poem, and speaks of that too, how that's important, to know the year, because we are, time's power. She won major prizes, this is very important, and a couple more things. She won major prizes very young, and then moved from what she knew, from what gained her these prizes and acclaim, and set out to explore, to make use of this privilege. The poem for Ethel Rosenberg is just one of the most powerful poems I've ever read. And we explain some of that. Most of us don't have such privilege. She recognized the opportunity and ran with it. This is amazing, though it shouldn't be. This is profoundly exceptional. She would not, and she did not sell out. And she also wrote incredibly of sex, of sex, a female desire for both men and for women. I mean, somebody could write a whole book just on that. It's extraordinary what she does. I mean, it's like, I've never read this, I've never seen this in words before when you read it.
Sharon, I got to ask you to wrap
Okay.
I think we got
Okay,
more
all right.
to do here.
Okay, just two famous lines. I mean, some of her famous lines. Poetry isn't a revolution, but a way of knowing why it must come. When my dreams showed signs of becoming politically correct, then I wondered. The decision to feed the world is the real decision, not no revolution has chosen it, for that choice requires that women shall be free. When I speak of an end to suffering, I don't mean anesthesia. I mean knowing the world and my place in it.